Hi again. This is G. Michael Vasey with My Haunted Life 2, the podcast. You might have visited my website, myhauntedlife2.com, and submitted your supernatural experience there, because I am a collector of supernatural stories. Today, I'm going to read you a selection of stories from the scary best of myhauntedlife2.com. Demon Intruder. One afternoon, when I was about 10 or 11 years old, my mum and brother had left to run errands and my dad was outside working on our car. My sister and I were playing tag inside of our home. My sister tagged me whilst I was in the living room, and she ran back into our bedroom. As I was walking back to our room where she'd ran, I heard a loud bang on the wall that's between the hallway and kitchen. This wall was not an area that could be accessed easily without moving our huge stove, refrigerator or Dutch oven, so I ran to our room and slammed the door behind me. I told my sister I thought someone was in the house, and we pressed ourselves against the door because we didn't have a lock. We heard footsteps slowly making their way down our hallway towards our room. We saw the shadow of 2 feet in the space between the carpet and our bedroom door. And we could hear heavy breathing. Then the door began to push open. My sister and I pushed back with all of our strength, and we were both screaming and praying with whatever was on the other side of the door would not get in. It felt like we were struggling with the door for a while, but I imagine it was only about 30 seconds or so when everything just stopped. No more struggling with the door, no more breathing, no more footsteps. My sister stayed up against the door while I went to the window to call my dad into the house. Keep in mind, there are only 2 entrances to our home, the front yard where my dad was, and the back door where our super protective dog was. In addition, we lived in a very active neighbourhood, and this was sometime in the early afternoon, where quite a few people were outside and no one would be able to get in or out of our home without my dad, neighbours or dog stopping them. When my dad got into the house and we told him what happened, he was completely spooked because all of the entrances, exits and windows were locked. It appeared no one had been in or out of our home at all. He checked all the closets and cabinets in the house. He checked under all of our beds and behind all of our large furniture. He found nothing. We don't know for sure what entity was messing with us that day, but what we do know is that spirits can get attached to items. About a week earlier, my brother bought the Mortal Kombat soundtrack, and it had some pretty morbid song titles. So my parents threw the soundtrack out, and we didn't experience anything weird after that. If anyone has experienced anything similar, please let me know. If it could have potentially been a friendly spirit, I would like to know how to contact it. Submitted by Tiffany Smith. Jack. This is Jeff James. I'm 70 years of age and I live in Queensland, Australia. The following narrative is sincere and truthful. I have absolutely no reason whatsoever to make the following story up. All I can say is that it happened. When this occurrence happened, I would have been about 3.5 years of age, and I've never forgotten it. This would have been in around 1951-52. My understanding is that this particular house came as a job package with my father's employment. I can still recall some parts of the house and its general interior layout. At this time, my parents and my sister, younger than myself, were living at Canal Street, Derby. I was 4 years of age when we moved to Wellington. I was never brought up with bogeymen tales or other happenings to cause some fear or to obtain obedience from me. Therefore, I cannot say that such imaginings were put into my head for me to invoke an event later. Despite my young age, I can recall this particular evening and event. The house was somewhat large, and it had semi-spiral staircase with a red-coloured stair carpet on the treads and risers. At the top of this staircase was a landing, which led to the bedrooms and bathroom. For whatever reason, I always used to ask my mother to leave the curtains open, and occasionally the windows to be partly open. It was one of these sash type of windows that opened and closed vertically. On the adjacent wall to the window was the door of the landing. This door was in the area of the foot of the bed, and to the right of the bed. The side of the bed was across from this wall, with the bed head on the wall behind me. There was a small table close to the head of the bed where I always had a tumbler of water, as often I'd wake up in the middle of the night and have a drink, which continues to this day. When in bed, and before the forthcoming event happened, I sometimes would hear what I thought to be the voice of someone who was speaking very softly, something like a loud whisper. The way this voice spoke, it sounded to me as if this person was looking for someone, but in a more inquiring fashion. Sometimes I didn't hear the voice, but it always came back, eventually. There was just the one word spoke, but it was repeated. This sounded to my ears to be Jack, Jack. These two words would stop for a short while, and then the two words were softly repeated. Jack, Jack. This may happen 3 or 4 times and then stop as if the person had gone away. I had no idea as to which gender this voice belonged. All of this caused me no issues whatsoever, and it certainly never frightened me. It was just there from time to time after I went to bed. The incident which I am about to relate I can well recall. My mother put me to bed, and as usual the curtains were left open and the window slightly cracked open. I never heard the soft-spoken words of inquiry, and so I must have fallen asleep. Later, I awoke to what sounded like 2 cats fighting outside. We had no pets, but there were a couple of cats that came into our small garden. And during all of this screeching and wailing from the cats, there was the sound of what appeared to me as being empty tin cans rolling, falling onto a paved surface, and then rolling along this surface. I imagined that the cats had run into such cans and toppled these over. All of this certainly caused me no concerns. I had a drink of water, and I must have gone back to sleep. I was awakened by a lady laughing. She was in front of the bedside table and between the edge of my bed and the wall where the door was located, which in turn was adjacent to the window at the foot of my bed. The lady was a nondescript colour, being a dark grey. However, I could see some patterns and frills on her dress. This was bell-shaped front and back, but more so at the back, and something that would be seen in the late 1700s to early 1800s. Her hair was pulled backwards and in the fashion of a bun at the back of her head. She appeared to have long sleeves on her dress that had a lace or other frill material close to her wrists. There seemed something like a frill or a lace collar to her dress. She had a bracelet on her right wrist. However, the most significant detail of this particular lady to me was that she was laughing, but more so, by the way, that she actually laughed and laughed. Her laughing was very loud, and it could be best described as being in the form of what is sometimes referred to as hysterical laughter. She had both her hands over her face and partly over her forehead, whilst she endlessly laughed. Throughout this laughing she was rocking forward and back up again from waist level. I don't recall if I was frightened, but even at my tender age at the time, I thought that something was amiss. I left my bed and went into my parents' room, woke them up and told them that there was a lady laughing in my room. And that is my story of the lady at 36 Canal Street, Derby. Nothing frightening, but I'd love to know if something ever went awry in the history of the house before we occupied it. Very many years later, I must have been around 17 or 18, I learned that this house had originally been built by a person that arrived in Derby from what is now Belgium. My understanding is that this person was associated with, or was, a founding member of the soft drink manufacturer Burroughs and Sturgis of Derby. This newly learned piece of news made me prick my ears up, as it made me think this was the voice that I sometimes heard when in my bedroom, which caused me no alarm or other concerns for saying, Jack, Jack. But in fact, could it have been Jacques, Jacques, or even being the shortened form of Jacqueline in the French-Belgian dialect? Very many years later, I learned that my parents often heard talking elsewhere in the house and persons moving about in the house, as well as furniture being shuffled around. However, there was never any evidence on inspection of any furniture that had been moved. There were neighbours who always had visitors, and they made some noises. However, these people left, and I was informed that the noises and inaudible talking within the house persisted on. My mother was somewhat concerned and rather uneasy at times about this house. Apparently my father was not so inclined. This attitude of my father may have been related to the fact that during World War II he served in the RAF. Consequently, he had little or no fears of noises or voices emanating from elsewhere in the house. In later life, I cannot recall seeing or believing my father to be the fearful type of person. I recall when in this house, and whether it was pre or post my experience of the lady, my aunt, visitors from Scotland. The only thing that I can recall was that my aunt, my younger sister and myself were playing in the lounge one night with Radio Luxembourg playing loudly. My parents had attended some function in Nottingham and my aunt was babysitting my sister and myself. My aunt appeared to be rather distressed, as I recall. My parents returned home and I can remember my father being the first to enter into the lounge. Both my parents were very surprised that my sister and I were still up, and also that the radio was playing loudly. The radio's volume was reduced and my aunt, who was now in tears, was speaking to both my parents and all on the far side of the room. I never heard one word of this conversation. I was told again many years later that my aunt was very frightened on this evening as she heard talking outside the lounge, along with other noises. Therefore, to drown out these voices, she'd increased the radio's volume, and furthermore, she would not venture outside this room to put us to bed. I tried a number of times after learning of this incident to get my aunt to tell her about her experience, but she adamantly refused to talk about it. And sadly, I never find out directly from the person concerned what actually occurred. We eventually left Derby and moved to the village of Willington, where my father originated. Many years later, the subject of 36 Canal Street came into the conversation with one of my father's friends. My father went on to say to this friend that the person who moved into the vacated house at 36 Canal Street, Derby, when we left for Willington, once pulled my father to one side and asked, "Is the house haunted?" Apparently, my father would neither confirm nor deny this. This person then told my father that he and his wife had heard all manners of noises within that house, with people talking, but their conversations were imperceptible. On one occasion, late one night, when he returned home from work, a lady had passed this man on the stairs. This lady said something to him, but he was very tired and unsure of what she'd voiced, and didn't realise this passing on the stairs until he was on the landing. Furthermore, and most interestingly, he told my father that his daughter, who was about 6 years of age, was very frightened in the house, and that she often heard someone calling out, "Jack, Jack." Furthermore, this little girl had seen a lady laughing very loudly in her bedroom. Submitted by Jeff James. So there's a couple of stories from the scary best of my haunted life too, true stories of the paranormal, edited by me, G. Michael Vasey, and available on Amazon.com in Kindle and in paperback formats. Do check out the website at myhauntedlife2.com, and also maybe check out and submit your own stories. Because everyone has a story.